This meeting of number 2 of the Interim Joint Committee on Education will come to order. Welcome everyone to the second meeting. As usual, if you are speaking against something in front of the committee, please sign up at the sign-up sheet in the back. You cannot speak if you're not signed up. Please call the roll.
Senator Carroll, Senator Funke Fromeyer, Senator Gibbons, Senator Higdon, Senator Meredith, Senator Neal,
Present.
Senator Stivers, Senator Thomas,
Here.
Senator Tishner,
Here.
Senator Williams,
Here.
Senator Wilson,
Here.
Senator Wise,
Here.
Representative Baker,
Here.
Representative Ballman,
Present.
Representative Bojanowski,
Here.
Representative Brown, Representative Emily Callaway, Representative Josh Callaway,
Here.
Representative Decker,
Present.
Representative Doan, Representative Jackson,
Present.
Representative Lewis,
Here.
Representative Massaroni,
Present.
Representative McCool,
Here.
Representative Proctor, Representative Rayburn, Representative Rawlings, Representative Raymond, Representative Riley, Representative Timoney,
Here.
Representative Truitt,
Here.
Representative Wilner,
Here.
Co-Chair West,
Here.
Co-Chair Tipton.
Here. We have a quorum duly constituted to conduct business. First up on the agenda, I'd like to recognize Co-Chair Tipton. Ask him if he has any comments as we get started.
Thank you, Chairman West. I'm fine. Let's proceed.
Are there any other members who have introductions of special guests? Seeing none, we'll get right into our business. We are going to flip-flop the agenda a little bit in deference to one of our senators. So we will start first with growing access to advanced coursework. If you would step forward. I believe all of our guests who are here today know the deal. Make sure the green light is on. State your name for the record, and then proceed with presentation. While they are doing that, we do need to approve the minutes from last meeting. Do we have any additions or corrections to the minutes?
Is it open?
Seeing none, do we have a motion for approval of the minutes? We have a motion. We have a second. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. Minutes are adopted.
All right. While we're getting the technology set up here with a little assistance, Chairman West, Chairman Tipton, members of the committee, we're excited, the three of us, to be here this morning to talk with you about the importance of advanced coursework. Advanced coursework access for our students across the state of Kentucky in urban areas and in rural areas, why it's important not only for the students today, but also for Kentucky's future. My name is Bridget Blum. I'm the president and CEO of the Pritchard Committee for Academic Excellence. Here with me at the table are Anthony Myers, the executive director of Advanced Kentucky, and Dr. Julia Roberts with the Western Kentucky University Center for Gifted Studies. I know you're familiar with both of them, and we at the Pritchard Committee are pleased to have them as partners in this effort. The conversation this morning is an opportunity to discuss the issue of advanced coursework and solutions to ensure that there is greater access for our students. In the 2024 legislative session, we were pleased to have introduced a bill that addressed this issue, Senate Bill 360. Our hope is that this conversation will open the door to potential passage of a bill in 2025 and continued progress on this topic in years ahead. Growing access to advanced coursework for Kentucky students is a twofold issue. The one issue of access is ensuring that our young people are prepared to be successful in advanced coursework. And the other issue with access is the fact that we have far too little actual advanced coursework within our school districts and in our communities. And there are a variety of reasons for this, which we can get into. But the access to support success and the access to the coursework itself are two components of the issue. So today's presentation will go over the current landscape, proposed solutions that are part of the bill that was filed in the last session and we hope to see filed in the next session, and then why this matters. A quick note on why this matters and kind of underscoring the importance of access to be successful in higher levels of coursework. This is a snapshot from the Pritchard Committee's Big Bold Future National Rankings Report. All of our work in education drives back to a desire to move these rankings so that Kentucky is in a stronger position nationally. Currently, and many of you have seen these rankings before, currently Kentucky ranks 29th in the nation in fourth grade reading. That's a fall from 8th in the nation in 2015. So we've been raising the flag on this for some time and are grateful to Senator West and to Representative Tipton for forwarding the Read to Succeed Act, which will help remedy this, and in the last session, the Numeracy Act, which will help remedy the other ranking you see here, which is 8th grade math proficiency. Where we currently rank 41st in the nation, we've never in Kentucky ranked above 33rd in the nation when it comes to mathematics. So if we're going to position ourselves nationally, a position of strength nationally as a state, and move to the top tier of all states, we have got to reckon with these numbers, own this truth, and design solutions that will ensure we are improving these rankings as a state and the outcomes for our students. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation then over to Anthony Myers with Advance Kentucky.
Thank you. For those of you who know us, you know that Advance Kentucky is built on an idea around open enrollment. Open enrollment is not to say reckless enrollment of students into courses. It's a purposeful recruitment and invitation into advanced courses so that we can identify students and meet them where they're ready to learn. And they're often ready to learn at higher levels than what we realize. I wish we could just help our schools build their courses and the students would enroll themselves, but that's not what happens. Oftentimes, parents, students don't understand the value proposition that these courses offer, so it takes a more active approach to go out and find the students, especially when we're looking at our broad middle group of students who could be participating in these courses, but just for whatever reason do not. So we spend a lot of efforts around that. And as mentioned earlier, you know, access is a big part of it. It's the first step in providing opportunities for our students. You got to have the class before they can enroll in it. But even after you have the class, you have to look at your school's demographics. Are you serving your students equally across the board? Does your advanced courses look like your AP or your general population? Then it comes to expectations. Oftentimes we find that when we're working with teachers, we have to define what high expectations look like. It's not their fault. Either it's been a moment since they've been in a class that has been advanced coursework, or you know, they maybe were never exposed to it themselves. I count myself as one of these students, one of these teachers. But you know, you can't hold high expectations if you don't know what they look like. So there's an intense need for professional development, mentorship, and support of these teachers as they try to do this work. And the last is, I'll use a word, gatekeeping, but it's often unintended, and it's often actually well-intended, but it ends up, you know, setting things like summer assignments, unnecessary workloads on students, just things that are they think will benefit the student in the long run, but really just serve to keep students out of these courses. So rather than creating policies to keep students out of advanced coursework, we encourage our schools to use whatever resources they have available, multiple data points, teacher recommendations, parent conversations, to actively recruit students into advanced courses. That's what we have to do. That's what we spend a lot of our time doing. But we're here today because we see the potential of what we're calling auto-enrollment as a way to change the conversation. We think, used correctly, it could be a great first pass to identify students capable of advanced coursework, but the invitation should remain broader and all students should have every opportunity to step up when they are ready. So I want to take a moment and just look at some data points to try to identify how many students we're talking about, right? So I'm going to show you two studies. This one is a study that we did with KY Stats, and there's about 50,000 students represented in those two charts over 4 years. It's a lot of students. At the top, you have Advanced Kentucky students. At the bottom, you have a control group where we were able to do a match pair analysis on students who had the same ability at the Explorer level. You may, if you've been in education, you may remember the Explorer test that we used to have. But like students, right? So you'll see at the top, Advanced Kentucky students, 86% of them took one or more AP exams compared to 30% in the control group. That's not surprising. We're an organization out there promoting access to AP, so you would expect that to happen, right? But we often get the criticism of, but do they perform at the same levels, or are you just putting students into these courses? So if you'll take a look at the next slide, this is the success that those students found. And you'll see that the Advanced Kentucky students, despite having 3 times as many students, performed at about the same level as the control group, who was brought into those courses through a more traditional approach, usually a restrictive approach, I will say. And I'd encourage you to not look at the percentages, but look at the incisors above each of the percentages. There's 3 times as many kids that can succeed if given the opportunity and support. And that's what we're missing. So we're missing about 2/3 of our kids just from the way that we bring these courses to them, waiting for them to come into these courses rather than actively recruiting them into them. One of the other barriers that we noticed when we did this research was that middle school math was a huge indicator of a student's willingness or even interest in pursuing advanced STEM courses in high school. And if we go to the next slide. So this is another program we run. We created Access to Algebra because we saw this barrier. 8th grade algebra is an important course. It's way more, people like to debate this course a lot. It's a way more volatile topic than you would imagine. But it is important, and what you're looking at here is, so we have about 7,000 students when we ran this report that had gone through our program, and on the bottom you have baseline 7th grade scores. Okay, so we just lumped students into what they scored in the 7th grade on the PSAT 8-9, and then we wanted to know, how did they perform? What did their increase look like going into 8th grade, separated into 2 different groups? The blue bars represent students who enrolled in general courses, and what we call general courses would be 8th grade honors math or below. The orange bars represent students who enrolled in Algebra 1 or higher. And if you want to really get to the point of what this is after, if you look at, say, 380, and you add 15 to the top of that, that's the growth of the students who enrolled in those general courses. So they grew to 395 in the 8th grade. But if you were to enroll a student with the same potential from 7th grade into Algebra 1 or higher, you'll see you stack on 49 points now instead of 15. They saw much greater growth. And actually that got them to college readiness benchmarks, on track to be college ready for that. So the course made the difference in the students. The students had the same ability. It was what we were exposing to them in the 8th grade that made the difference in that. So just putting all this together, the combined takeaway from these 2 sets of data is that the earlier we can expose students to advanced coursework, the higher that we can take them each year. And every student we miss in middle school, at least in this, and I would presume backing up down into elementary school, is a student less likely to participate in advanced coursework later on.
So the proposed solutions that we put forth in a bill last session and are working on draft language for the next session include automatic enrollment, as Anthony mentioned, with an opt-out option for parental notification. So as Anthony described, this means if a student is meeting the criteria to be in advanced coursework, they're automatically enrolled in that next class. We're not leaving it up to the parents needing to know about it or the student saying, I want to be in that class. It's just an automatic progression of learning that would happen, unless the parent would ask that the student not be involved in that class. We would expand access through online courses and reciprocal district agreements. You all have heard many times that we have an issue with the supply of teachers in the state, and particularly in these areas for advanced coursework, math and the sciences. So we have to think differently, and we're in a time when we should be thinking differently about how we deliver this information. I hit somebody's agenda on that topic. How we deliver this information to students in all of our districts, regardless of barrier. And so that's a component as well. Incentives for teachers and students. Advanced Kentucky has been at the forefront of that, implementing accelerated learning policies, again, at the district level, so that we don't hold students back based on our maybe inherent biases and how we think about student progression. And then lastly, providing annual reporting to you all with accountability to the LRC. So that reporting is important. Again, if we go back to the point is to improve education outcomes that help drive our state forward and the people in our state forward. And so we need to measure that. We need to know that that's happening as a result of the strategies we choose to put our weight and our investment behind. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Dr. Julia Roberts.
So why does automatic enrollment in advanced courses matter?
If you could make sure your
your
mic is on.
I'll start over. I
There
saw
you go.
green, but not bright green. Kentuckians love to cheer for players at the varsity level. Is that right? Yep. Yeah. Let's make it possible to have young Kentuckians performing at the varsity level in academics. Specifically, let's have varsity level players in mathematics. Kentucky has many students ready to learn at advanced levels. Many of them have few, if any, opportunities in their schools to learn at advanced levels. All students at all grade levels are not ready to learn the same level on any subject. Some need advanced coursework to stay motivated in school and to reach their potential. This visual that you see demonstrates what research on thousands of fifth grade students tells us. 2/3, and you can see the navy blue and orange there, 2/3 of the students in fifth grade classrooms are not yet ready to learn at fifth grade level, but rather third or fourth grade levels. Approximately 10%, and those will be your smaller pieces on the table, 10% of the children are performing at the sixth grade level or at a level 2 or more grades above fifth grade. Teachers have an impossible job to see that all students at more than 7 readiness levels in a heterogeneous classroom are learning. In many classrooms across the Commonwealth, the message is to get everyone up to proficient or grade level. In these classrooms, students ready to learn at advanced levels are left waiting for learning at the advanced level at which they are ready to learn. Benefits of advanced coursework are important. Advanced coursework increases post-secondary enrollment and, probably even more important, college persistence. So not only do you get in, you stay in and graduate. It is also a benefit of advanced coursework to encourage college credit accumulation, persistence, hard work, and deeper engagement. Please know it is not possible to develop study skills, be persistent, or work hard in classes that are easy for you. Let me share an example of a Kentucky student who just graduated from the Gatton Academy. He entered Gatton having scored a 5 on BC Calculus. Now, that's the top level of calculus. He was a sophomore, and he got a 5 on that. He graduated from the Gatton Academy taking 8 additional math courses. Graduated from high school, taking 8 additional math courses, including graduate courses in mathematics. This young Kentuckian would be playing on the varsity team if he were a basketball player performing at this level. In fact, he would be playing for Kentucky in the Kentucky-Indiana series. We have young people ready to do this in mathematics, but they must have classes that give them the opportunity to learn at advanced levels. We need advanced coursework to have our young mathematicians and scientists performing at advanced levels. We need advanced coursework to prepare Kentucky students to be competitive as they enter college and the workforce. Please know that advanced coursework is an economic development priority as well as an education need. Let's support advanced coursework for all students who are ready to learn at advanced levels. Let's have Kentucky students learning at a level to play on the varsity academic teams as they graduate from our high schools. Thank you.
So in closing, I'll just add that as you all are hearing about the issue of chronic absenteeism in the state, this is a solution in part to ensure greater engagement of our young people in learning, which also stems the tide on chronic absenteeism. My guess is each one of you may know a young person who at some point in high school began to check out because they were no longer engaged. Or maybe that happens in middle school. So access to advanced coursework, learning that meets their needs is part of that deepened engagement, stemming the tide on chronic absenteeism. The other component here is graduation and a ready graduation. So access to advanced coursework, higher levels of learning, greater math and reading proficiency means that being third in the nation in high school graduation is third in the nation in preparation for post-high school success. And this is a solution that will help get us there. Senator West, Representative Tipton, thank you.
Thank you so much for that excellent presentation. We really appreciate it. We do have several questions here lined up. I'm going to start us off. This is actually not my question. It's a text from someone else, but it's a good question. What incentive does a student have to take an AP course if it's also offered as a dual credit class? So, for instance, they have to receive a passing score to get college credit, whereas they only have to complete the course to get the dual credit. Is that a problem?
I think it would come down to a lot of things. Primarily, it would be where the student's thinking about post-secondary and the articulation policies were the courses. So that's a very literal answer to it. I think it would also come down to, courses can have, depending on the course titles and the courses we're talking about, the content can vary. It's pretty clear what AP content is. It's published. You can go look it up and see exactly what you're going to learn. And there is I'll say this too, when we talk to schools, we advocate for a strong dual credit and AP environment for students. You need both, and both have different things to offer. And I'll speak from the AP perspective, and what we tell schools and why they should offer AP courses is that, an AP course is a globally accepted, right? It's globally recognized. And a student that earns a 3 on an AP course in pick any county in Kentucky is the same 3 that's earned at any private school in New England. It's a level playing field. So I think that's an advantage. But I think that doesn't discount the dual credit experience. I think it's where you find your strengths, your teachers. If you have teachers who can teach those courses, put them in it, whether it's dual credit or AP. Get the kids that experience.
Very good. Representative Bojanowski.
Thank you. So, I did take algebra in 7th grade, and it did put me on a very strong math trajectory. Albeit I was moved out of TV math to go into algebra. So that was a different era in Kentucky education. My question is, so I am not familiar with Advanced Kentucky. Can you tell me how the model works, and do you subcontract with districts or just kind of go over your programming?
So We take applications for our program, and the application's largely a readiness application and a philosophy application more than anything. They do have to submit some data to us, but so it starts with the application, and what we're looking for is, do you believe your students can do more? Primarily. Sometimes the conversation stops there, and we don't work with schools, but that's rare. That's very rare. Most schools believe in that proposition, and then if they do, we work with them for 3 years, providing professional development around, specifically, obviously, in our Access to Algebra program, algebra in the 8th grade, but we work with 6th, 7th, and 8th grade teachers and talk about math as a continuum rather than isolation by grade. That, yes, you're a 6th grade teacher, but you're preparing kids for 8th grade math. And what does that look like, and how do you connect? So we bring them in as teams and train them. And then, as we mentioned too earlier, there's incentives along with that. So students get incentives for meeting the readiness benchmarks on the PSAT 8-9, correlated down to the 8th grade. But we also do it on growth. So if a student, we don't want any student to check out, right? So if they see that that's a difficult proposition, well, show us you can grow. And it's aggressive growth from 7th to 8th grade, but many students do that each year. And that usually moves them up 2 grade levels in that process. And then tied to that is also teacher incentives that we couple with that as well. And the teacher incentives are tied to the increase in performance in the school. With that, we also provide mentorship and all kinds of wraparound services that go with that. And we send people in, and we'll model lessons. We'll do a lot of different things. It's basically a discussion that starts happening with that school at the beginning to the end. And the AP program runs very similar to that as well.
Senator Neal.
You may have answered my question, but I'm looking at this piece here regarding proposed solutions. It says legislative proposals, automatic enrollment, and opt-out option for parental notification. I may have missed this. Describe that. It may appear obvious, but describe how that works.
Sure. Senator Neal, that is if a student meets the criteria to be in an advanced class, say in mathematics, the student would be automatically enrolled in the next semester, the next year, in that advanced class. So what this automatic enrollment does is just take the burden of making that decision off of the student or off of the parent, automatically enrolls the student in the next progression of learning for him or her. If the parent should feel that that is too much for the student for a variety of reasons, then it would be on the parent to say, I don't want my student enrolled in that advanced class. Right now, it's the opposite, where a student or a parent has to actively say, I want my child in advanced classes. So the opt-in would just ensure that students, based on their ability shown in coursework, that they're moved into the next progression of learning.
And I'd like to add, we're not the first state to be looking at doing this. North Carolina's been doing it for several years, and there's 6 or other states who've looked at automatic enrollment, so we can look at their experience and learn from that.
Senator
proceed.
Neal, with this slide, the light orange, and I'll let Anthony speak to this more, but it's my understanding the light orange here in the middle that he's saying would have gotten greater gains is an example of students who would be automatically enrolled in advanced coursework based on their ability to achieve at higher levels.
Yes. Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You may have answered my question because you spoke to these wraparound services and other supportive services to help ensure student success. I'm just wondering, in terms of the criteria as to who is eligible for this, is there a door somewhere for those who aspire and perhaps with those services could still graduate to that level of participation?
Are you asking me about schools?
Yes.
We'll take as many as we can fund and as many as we can find.
I'm talking about those that do not automatically fit
Oh,
your criteria.
Right. So, Senator Neal, and the criteria is based on performance in the most recent class. And Dr. Roberts, you may want to address this through some of the gifted and talented work.
Actually, North Carolina has used a higher bar than we are proposing. We're proposing that students who score at proficient or above would be automatically enrolled in advanced coursework. We think this would bring in many traditionally underrepresented students to be automatically enrolled. We think it would be really important for Kentucky.
I may have not framed my question properly. I get the automatic piece, those who fit the criteria. I'm trying to see those who do not necessarily fit that criteria, whether there's a gateway, a process, a pathway to, and they have a desire to participate at that level. Is there a way?
And the answer is yes.
Okay, that's what I need
Yes.
described.
Yeah, I see this as a first pass that we're not using, right? It's not the last look that we look at our students. And when we encourage, currently we're operating obviously without this policy, right? So when we work with our schools to try to identify advanced students and increase enrollments, we look at parent conversations, we look at teacher recommendations, we look at multiple data points, test scores. We're looking for reasons to bring them in, right? Any reason we can find, really, and bring them into the course. And then, as Bridget stated, let's take this approach from an opt-out angle rather than an opt-in angle. Let's be as inclusive as we can. And I see these scores as the start of that conversation, where we're not having the conversation right now.
Thank you very much.
Representative Wilner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for your presentation. This is a topic that I care about a lot. It's something that I've thought about a lot, that I've had a lot of conversations with teachers and administrators about this. And currently, and I think it's partly driven by the state accountability system, there's a mindset, and we know how important it is to close gaps, to narrow gaps, to bring kids who are struggling up to grade level. That's so important, but it's sometimes the pushing kids forward or the providing opportunities for kids who can do more, and most of our kids can do more. It becomes this either or, right? It's like we're so busy, we're so singularly focused on bringing up the kids who are at apprentice or novice that we don't have time. We don't have time to advance kids. And I think that's why we have the results that we have, right? And so how do we change that mindset? We could pass this policy, and I would support it, today, but we could pass this policy, but how do we change the mindset? Do we need to change the accountability system? Teachers are so overworked, so overburdened. Our administrators are as well. And so how do we change it so we do all of those things? We bring the struggling kids up and we move the kids who can ahead.
Dr. Roberts.
I think this speaks to lots of scaffolding for students. In sports, we know that all students are not ready to play on the varsity team. So what do we do to get students ready to do that? We've got to do that in school, and that speaks to doing some grouping of students based on readiness so the teacher has the opportunity not to address 7 levels within a classroom, but to concentrate on students. Think for yourself, and I don't know what kind of a sport you would be interested in, but if you were asked to play today with varsity players, would you be ready? What are the scaffolding steps that it takes to get you there? And we've got to have a message that what's important in school is for every student to be learning every day. And in order to do that, you've got to put students together flexibly to let them, as they progress, be taught what they're ready to learn. You can only learn what's above where you are. I can't learn something I already know. And we call that zone of proximal development in education. And we've got to hit that. And you can't do that in heterogeneous classes all the way up. The message must be every child learning every day in school? And how do we go about doing that?
We talk about the achievement gap. This is what I know I've heard Dr. Roberts refer to as the excellence gap. And we've got to close that excellence gap. One of the ways, I think, Representative Wildner, we can also do that is by focusing on governance and school boards at the local level, adopting policies that help ensure students at the local level have access to advanced coursework. And the district is committed to ensuring the teachers, the professionals there to have that advanced coursework available.
Senator Givens will have the last word in this segment.
Chairman West, thank you. And Chairman West, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Senate Bill 360 was a bill you sponsored, wasn't it?
It was not.
It was not. Okay. Piece of
But
legislation.
we allowed it to go through.
Excellent. Piece of legislation that they had discussed initially was Senate Bill 360.
Correct.
And that created the conversation, and you're indicating you're hoping to bring that back.
Yes.
As you and whoever the bill sponsor was and others work on the legislation, listening to the conversation makes me ask, and I don't know the answer to this, but there may be some unintended disincentives in our systems now. If I'm a student concerned about my key score, do I really want to take an AP class that may ding me? I don't know. Maybe all the districts weight that GPA a little or weight that test score, that class score. But there may be a student unintended disincentive to taking rigorous coursework under the current KEYS model. From a district perspective, if I've got a student that's going to score a 3.0 in an advanced class, but I know that she might score a 4.0 in the standard class, does the current accountability model incent me to want her to take the rigorous course, or does it currently say to me, I'm better off with her scoring a 4.0 in the standard, because when the state looks at my total scores, I look like a better district. So whoever runs the legislation, I would encourage that they be engaged in those conversations, because we need to remove all the disincentives we can, because we know the rigor benefits these students long term.
Thank you for that,
Thank you.
Senator Givens. And we will take that into consideration as we continue to work on this issue.
Back to your initial question, Senator, it was proposed, but obviously didn't make it across the finish line and to the appropriate channels. But to your question, Advanced Kentucky and AP will be part of a larger discussion that if we have another bill, we also want to try to clean up some of these issues that goes along to my first question, that they compete against each other. So thank you so much. We will, for the presentation, great presentation. We'll keep this moving right along. Next up, we have middle school athletics.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman,
Representative Callaway,
I record my attendance, please.
you are hereby recorded.
Thank you.
Recorded as attending. I think everyone knows these two at the table. If you would state your names for the record and please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jimmy Higdon, State Senator, and here today with Julian Tackett, Commissioner of Kentucky High School Athletic Association. Under Commissioner Tackett, the Kentucky High School Athletic Association is probably one of the models in the nation, the work that they do, and they strive every day to make sure that every student has the opportunity to participate in sports and wants to participate, and they do so safely. The conversation today, of course, it's Kentucky High School Athletic Association. The conversation today is about middle school, and I received 2 calls this year about middle school students who wanted to participate in sports at another middle school. Not at the high school. We have that problem from time to time where students want to play up, and maybe they're ready, maybe they're not. But that's a whole different subject. But this is two young students who both in the 8th grade. One in my district that wanted to play soccer, but his middle school did not have a soccer team. He wanted to play on another middle school team in the county, and then in Senator Storm's district, a young man that wanted to play football. His school district his 8th grade school did not have a football team, and he wanted to play at another team in the not the same school district, but in the same county. Both students were denied, not because of state law, not because of any rule the Kentucky High School Athletic Association has. We've kind of left middle school up to local governance, let the schools govern themselves. And it works out real well sometime, and sometime it doesn't. But I think we needed to have the discussion about, these two students who wanted to play sports and could not because of really bureaucracy. The school district that in my district said that the student couldn't play because it wasn't a feeder school for that particular school, and so anyway, that's why we invited the commissioner to come today and maybe say a few words about this issue and maybe going forward how we could remedy that.
Thanks, Senator Higdon and Chair Tipton and Chair West for the opportunity.
Commissioner, before you start,
yes, sir.
I'd like to just lay down some ground rules for our members. We got a lot to cover in DEI here in a few minutes. So the itinerary says middle school athletics. So we're focused on middle school athletics today. So if you could, members, please stay within that framework as we go forward. Please proceed.
And for those that have been to a track meet, we will protect the integrity of the time schedule. So I do know you have a big load today. Senator Higdon and 2 or 3 others called this spring with the same opportunity. And we have an assistant commissioner, Sarah Bridenbaugh, who regularly interfaces with the middle schools, and they have questions about this regulation. As part of the regulation that gives us the authority to manage middle schools, there are a few things that the districts are required to make decisions on. They have to make decisions on an age limit within the grades if it's not covered. Maybe they have an age restriction on students below grade 6, how long the seasons are, how many scrimmages they play, etc. Nothing in the regulation contemplated in 2012 when this body helped craft it. Nothing in the regulation envisioned every rule at the high school level applying to the middle school level. Very purposefully, situations are different in different communities, and we encourage them to take that opportunity to look at it. And we believe one of the things we are noticing that I've shared with Senator Higdon on a couple of occasions, nationwide and in our state, participation at the middle school level has not recovered from pre-pandemic levels. That will be something that will impact high schools at some point because they're not going to come for the first time as a 10th or 11th grader. So we have encouraged some flexibility within the districts. I've even talked as late as yesterday with some folks with our good friends at KSBA about maybe getting some communication out to make sure they understand that they have some opportunities there. It doesn't have to be a flat, in concrete decision. They can look at specific situations. But when you all asked us in 2011 to study it, and 2012 approved the results of that study, the whole purpose was to elevate middle school athletics and give those students the same advantages of having to meet a rigorous curriculum, having to meet attendance rules, et cetera, that we have preached and you all have preached for years. So we'll try to answer any other questions anyone has, but we really believe that this is a case where we have a number of districts that are very flexible with participation at the middle school level, and we have some that are not, and we just want to make sure those that aren't know they have flexibility.
Thank you so much. Do we have any members with questions on this subject matter? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and ask the question. So Senator Higdon, we see the problem. Do you have a proposed solution?
Not at this time. That's why we wanted to get with the commissioner and see where we could go from here. What do we need to be involved? Is it something that working with the Kentucky High School Athletic Association, we can give some guidance to these middle schools? Because it's about the students. If a student wants to play a sport, they should be able to play a sport if it's available in their community and without the bureaucracy getting in the way.
So I've got another question. Then Representative Baker's up next. So, could you do this with regulation, or would you have to have a new KRS to give you authority to move into the middle school sports?
Because of your other roles here, one of the things that could occur with ARRS is putting the fact that there is permission specifically in the regulation instead of it being an interpretation that it's by local districts.
Make the authority. You think it's already there, but we could do a KRS making the authority to clear it up.
Correct, either through KRS or through the regulation itself.
Okay. Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wholeheartedly support that students have an opportunity to play, but just thinking through a potential consequence of that, if the reason they don't have a team is they just don't have enough interest currently, what happens when they have enough interest and they can now have a team, they have enough people to play? Would that student have to come back? I think these are some things that we want to think through to make sure that we don't keep them from wanting to have a team in the future because they think, well, we can just send them somewhere else. And therefore, if we do that, we may end up in a situation where more kids who at your school may want to play in the future don't have that opportunity because they can't all go play at the same school.
And one of the beauties of it being locally controlled, it's the same discussion you have when you get a consolidation. They have those same worries, and they would be able to know if those pressure points exist in their community. I do believe there's some administrators who don't really believe they have that authority. They believe it's hard-lined. So you're right, there's both sides. Luckily, there's no transfer restriction, none of the other convoluted rules that have had to be put in place at the high school level. But it's a great point. You'd want to think through any solution.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Representative Masroni.
Would this also be open to like the homeschoolers? Does this want to address their issues? We have a lot of homeschoolers in my county that want to play sports, and sometimes they're not allowed to play in the local districts. So would this address their concern as well?
At the middle school level, which is 5th through 8th graders playing 6th through 8th grade competition, that restriction does not exist anywhere.
Okay.
That is a local decision. The high school level is a different story. It would require some statutory changes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Senator Williams.
She asked my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you.
Mr. Tackett, we may have you back again in the interim to digest what happened in athletics with the passing of certain KRSs. So thank you so much. Next up, we have diversity, equity, and inclusion in post-secondary institutions. If the presenters would come forward at this time. We are going to go a little bit out of order here. We'll first bring up Travis Powell with CPE. We're going to bring up the Goldwater Institute last. And after CPE, we will have Northern Kentucky University and then Morehead State University. And so that'll be kind of the flow. If you could, each presenter try to stay within about a 10-minute time frame, so we allow plenty of time for questions. Just while you're getting settled, just as a public service announcement for members of the committee, if you want to blame anybody for this, you can blame me and maybe Representative Tipton. I think he was in on this. But this is the subject matter we felt was appropriate to bring at this time. There were a couple of DEI bills in the last session, one from the Senate, one from the House, and others. And we felt that if we were going to broach the subject, if this subject was going to be addressed again, that we should have all the information available to us, and we should have a thorough understanding of what all of our post-secondary institutions were doing as it pertains to DEI. So we had committee staff sent out an extensive list of questions, pretty detailed, a list of questions for all the universities to present. And I've asked staff to make that available to all the members to see, what we asked the universities. They are presenting information to us that answer those questions. That information is voluminous, but we are going to present that also online. Anybody can go in and look at it, whatever they present. But so what they're covering here today is just kind of the tip of the iceberg, some of those questions that we ask you, and we really appreciate you appearing. This will be part 1, and our September meeting will be part 2 of DEI, and we'll have all the other universities appear at that time. So that's just kind of a tee-up, set up for what we're doing today. So whenever you're ready, state your name for the record and proceed.
Good. My name is Travis Powell. I'm Senior Vice President and General Counsel for the Council on Postsecondary Education.
And I am Dr. Dawn Offit. I am the Executive Director for Access, Engagement, and Belonging for the Council on Postsecondary Education.
Thank you. So we'll go ahead and get started here. We focused today on, since we knew chairs that we were that all the campuses are going to be asked to testify, we really decided to focus on what does CPE do in this area, and really and let the campuses talk about the work that they do. So again, really focusing on CPE today and what the council has done in this area. So just a little bit of a history lesson here. Over the last 40 years, the council, in its prior version, the Council on Higher Education, before higher ed reform in 1997, was tasked with responding to the U.S. Department of Education desegregation plan. So the Office of Civil Rights determined in 1982 that Kentucky was one of several states operating a racially segregated system of higher education in violation of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination based on race by recipients of federal funding. So the idea here was to overcome the effects of past discrimination and de-establish any vestiges of a dual system that might remain. So in 1982, Kentucky entered into what was called the Kentucky Plan. And the focus here was really on the enhancement of Kentucky State University as Kentucky's only public HBCU, and desegregating student enrollment in the state through recruitment and retention programs for black students. So this was really focused on African American students, and also desegregating faculty, staffs, and governing boards. And so Kentucky went through several iterations of a plan in order to respond to the Office of Civil Rights. And in the interim, in 1992, Senate Bill 398 was adopted, and I believe, Senator Neal, you were the sponsor of this legislation, which states that the council, in its authority of approving new academic programs, must postpone the approval of new academic programs unless institutions meet their equal educational opportunity goals. And this really tied well with the process that was already in place when the Kentucky Plan was implemented. And so, but in 2008, over 25 years later, Kentucky was released from this desegregation plan on the Office of Civil Rights, which was a great accomplishment for the state. But we still had this legislation in place in order to set equal educational opportunity goals. And so, in 2010, the council created a new diversity plan, and then in 2016, we created a DEI policy that was integrated into our strategic agenda. Now, this is actually copied. We'll talk a lot about our policy today, but this is actually captured in Administrative Regulation 13 KAR 2060. We have regulatory authority to adopt this regulation, and the policy is incorporated by reference and then therefore the law of the state. So why we do this work, I think it's important just to take a look at our North Star here for a moment. And, and just about any presentation you hear from CPE, you'll hear us talk about 60 by 30. That's 60% of the population to have a post-secondary credential that matters by 2030. And in order to meet this goal, we're going to have to meet the needs of all our underserved populations, our low-income students, our underrepresented students, our rural students, first-generation students, all different types of diversity that we have in our state. We're not going to get to this goal unless we address all the different populations and help them to be successful. So that's really how we frame our policy at CPE. I think in our policy that I referenced earlier, we have the definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think definitions are important, and I think our definitions probably vary for some of the ones that have been represented in the past. when we talk about this subject and when it gets discussed, and just those three letters get discussed. But when we talk about diversity, we define this very broadly. People with varied human characteristics, ideas, worldviews, and backgrounds. Note that we didn't include a laundry list of items like race, ethnicity, religion, different political ideology. We actually had those in a version of this definition at first, but then in trying to be inclusive, we realized the more that we list, and we don't list a group of individuals, then the more that they're going to feel like they've been left out. So we decided to leave it as broad as possible, because the way that we think about diversity evolves and changes over time. And the other two definitions, again, are really framed broadly, and it's just really an understanding when you look at equity here, ensuring that individuals have equal access to educational and programs and actually participate in those programs. So it's not just that we get them in the programs, but they're actually actively engaged in those programs. That's the only way that we know they're really going to be successful. And then in looking at inclusion, quite simply, this is just getting a better understanding of who we are, who we're interacting with, and how to best meet students where they're at so they can feel comfortable on their campus to be the best version of themselves. Because if they're not able to be comfortable in an environment and feel like they belong, they're not going to be successful. This is not a transactional type thing on our campuses. Our campuses are home for these students, however they're engaging with them in the time that they're on campus, and we want to make sure that they feel like they belong there, so in order for them to be successful. So I mentioned the evaluation of progress towards equal educational opportunity goals, and there's nothing else in the statute that defines really what that is, and so it's up to CPE to make that determination in order to determine how institutions are going to be eligible to offer new degree programs. So the plan currently has 3 areas for improvement: opportunity, success, and impact. That's aligned with our strategic agenda from 2016. I'll talk a little bit later about moving forward and changes we'll need to make, but those were the areas that we looked at. And in those areas, we have quantitative and qualitative measures. Now, on the quantitative side, we are setting targets and goals for URM students, underrepresented minority students, and low-income students. And we're setting goals in enrollment. And let me talk about it for a second. And you may question to say, well, why are we setting goals? Is that a quota? Or I know that from the Supreme Court cases that quotas are illegal. Why are we setting quotas for students in enrollment? Well, these are not quotas. These are targets that we set, and we look at progress towards those targets. We evaluate that progress based on a scoring rubric that they have. So if they meet the target, they get a 2. If they make progress, they get a 1. And if they're behind the baseline, they get a 0. We evaluate enrollment on a holistic matter. So we look at different populations, and we set goals with the campuses. But no one student is discriminated against based on any of our policies that we have in place. And we want to make sure that nothing in our policy requires that. These are not set-asides for a certain number of students. We're not saying that you have to have a certain number of African-American students in your schools. We're not saying that at all. We have targets, but we expect institutions to follow the law. And as a practical matter, our institutions are very open. Admission rates for some of our institutions, for example, UK is 92% admissions rate, so any of those applied, 92 are admitted. Morehead State University, 82%. Northern Kentucky University, 96%. Western Kentucky University, 97%. If folks are applying and they're qualified, we're allowing them to come to our campuses. And our overall enrollment is down. While we're ticking up in enrollment, now since COVID, and we're really proud of that, overall, since 2015, 2016, we are down about 35,000 students over a whole system and about 10,000 for our 4-year institutions. So we're not about turning anybody away on our campuses at all. But that's just essentially 4 points of the 36 that we evaluate in order to get the 24 points in order to get a passing score. We also set targets for underrepresented and low-income students in first to second year retention rates, graduation rates, degrees conferred, and then also workforce diversity. And the biggest focus there you'll see is on student success. Once we get students in, we want to be committed to make sure that they can be successful, both our low-income students and our underrepresented students. In order to do that, we ask institutions to identify strategies, and we do a qualitative analysis of the strategies that they implement in order to meet these goals. And so the way that we evaluate these strategies, it's essentially equally weighted on a quantitative and a qualitative basis, 18 points for each for our 4-year institutions and 16 only for quantitative for our 2-year because they don't have a graduate enrollment. But we look at the qualitative piece and we ask institutions, okay, tell us what strategies you're implementing in order to meet these goals. And then did you actually, and we evaluate, did you actually implement the things that you told us to do? So you implemented a mentoring program for students, okay, to help them to be more successful. Did you actually do that? Then please analyze how effective this program has been. So we ask institutions to actually take a look at what they're doing in order to know whether or not it's been successful. And then we ask them to tell us what lessons they've learned from that analysis and what next steps they're going to take. And we have our diversity plan, DEI plans for institutions are evaluated all the time. They make changes to these plans. These are dynamic documents. They do this evaluation, and then they'll determine often that this, what we're doing here is not working. So let's implement another strategy in order to help them be successful. It's very much a continuous improvement model, and that continuous improvement is embedded in this evaluation process. Before I turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Offit, you can get some examples here about what campuses are doing and see the results through this best practices and diversity, equity, and inclusion that we issued back in 2023, about a year ago. It's in your materials, but just to give you some example, we've got several strategies that we think have really moved the needle here that we've identified for campuses that have been most successful and commonalities among strategies of campuses that have been successful. And you'll see a lot of these here deal with better engaging students. And the thing that I like the most about this is that many, if not most of all these, if not all of the student success initiatives here that you see are available to all students. But we know that they have a disproportionate positive impact on the populations, those low income and underrepresented minority populations that we're trying to serve. So everybody gets a chance to participate in these high impact practices, but we know that they're really helping move the needle and closing those achievement gaps that Dr. Offit's going to speak about now.
So as you heard Mr. Powell talk about, we have a premise of continuous improvement that we operate under. You saw the previous slide that talked about our best practices, and what we really want to do is look at the initiatives that we implement to make sure that they are being effective, to make sure that we are identifying what is working best, and also being able to see where we have growth areas and where we need to improve. And part of what informs that is the data. So if you look on the slide here, you can see that we have in the areas of retention rates and graduation rates, overall our students from our baseline of 2015-2016, when we talked about our DEI policy and when we started looking at these numbers, we have improvements at KCTCS in that system office, as well as with our four-year institutions. We have overall improvement in both retention rates and graduation rates. In addition, when we start looking at those populations of underrepresented minority students as well as low-income students, you also see growth from 2015-2016 to our most recent data as well. And it's a little hard to see, but it's, those identified in that blue, what is really particularly exciting about that is that those numbers tend to exceed the improvement of the overall students. And so we're really excited about the work that we've done. We see that this is moving us to our needle, our North Star of our 60 by 30 goal that was mentioned earlier, but we also know that there's work that still needs to be done. Mm-hmm. And so some additional initiatives that we have to assist the work on our campuses, you'll see on the screen. Our first is our Academic Leadership Development Institute that we call ALDI, not to be confused with the grocery store, and that we look at a year-long professional development for our early career faculty and staff from diverse backgrounds who aspire to leadership positions. And since 2018, we have implemented 4 cohorts, and that tends to be around 85 participants. And the goal of that is to give them a broader perspective about post-secondary education from both a national as well as a statewide perspective. And we get really positive feedback from our participants, and just a few numbers from 2021, we've had 50% of those participants that have achieved career advancement or promotion. In 2022, we had 40% of those participants, and most recently in 2023, we had 25 of those participants. So we're really excited about that program. In addition, we have a cultural competency credential certification. And I'll start by saying, when we talk about culture, we know that culture are those learned patterns of behavior, values, traditions that are shared amongst a particular group of people. And we talk about cultural competency then we look at the self-awareness of individuals for their cultures to which they belong, the knowledge of the individual cultures of the people that we work with and that we serve, and then having the skill set to be able to cross-culturally communicate, collaborate, and connect with individuals from different cultures. So we have a cultural competency credential certification that's a statewide certification process that we have implemented to recognize the cultural competency work that is done on our post-secondary education institutions. And we wanted to make sure that they got recognized for the work that they've been doing. And then finally, we have our Higher Equity Symposium, which is our annual event that we gather together to discuss best practices to ensure post-secondary success for those student populations that are diverse and typically underserved. You'll see a few examples of some of the workshop sessions that we've had, and one of the panel discussions that we had in our last symposium that we were really excited about was entitled Cultivating a Commonwealth for All. And our panelists included a representative that spoke about veteran students and the importance of working with that population. We had a representative for women in manufacturing. We had a representative for students with disabilities, and we had also a representative for our adult learners, specifically those age 50 and above. Next slide, please. And so our why here is listed here. Why are we so passionate about the work that we do? Why are we doing this? At the end of the day, we want to make sure that all Kentuckians have the opportunity to get the post-secondary education that they need to be able to be successful and thrive, and be successful citizens and thrive in their abilities to do whatever it is they choose to do and what they need to do to take care of themselves and their families. And so we know this is important, and it has two benefits. One, as a statewide benefit for the state of Kentucky, we know that the more educated a citizenry that we have, the more economic development and growth that we have, and the more civically engaged those individuals are. And as an individual benefit, then the more educated an individual is, the more opportunities they have to decrease health disparities, to have better job preparedness, and be able to take care of themselves and their families.
Just to wrap up here, we talk a little bit about what we have moving forward and kind of what's on our plate for the remainder of the year. We're still looking at updating the statewide policy. Obviously, this is part of an administrative regulations, which requires that process in order to change this. We're evaluating some different elements there, looking at different metrics and targeted populations. Low income, first generation students, adult learners, these are things that have been incorporated in a performance funding model that we want to make sure that that's aligned. Low performing high school students is something that we've discussed, differently abled individuals in order to help them be more successful. We're limited a little bit on what we can count. We have data on certain groups and some we don't, and some we want to encourage and like to set some targets on, but we don't have good data on there. But what we can do is to make sure that we have processes in place that we know that they can benefit from. Adjusting the elements of the performance funding model, Senate Bill 191, it passed this last session. We'll be pulling the performance funding work group together in order to define that underrepresented students metric that we've been asked to define. And whenever we define that, we want to make sure that that's aligned in any policies that we have, and so we can help better support that. And then also shifting CP's work. We have a new K-12 policy and programs, student access and success unit at CPE, which our Access, Engagement, Belonging unit is a part of, and that includes K-12 policy and programs, the Student Success Collaborative, Gear Up Kentucky, which is out in our high schools and helping low-performing or underserved high schools, Kentucky Advising Academy, help to better advise students on transition to post-secondary dual credit. This is all part of one unit now at CPE, and so we can better make sure that we meet the needs of our diverse populations of students across all those elements that I talked about moving forward. Through all the elements, through their post-secondary journey, and then hopefully into their careers.
Thank you so much for that excellent presentation. I know you put a lot in that segment, a lot in that amount of time. For members, we have 5 questions already. I'm going to stop it there at those 5 questions. And if you could, when you ask your questions, please keep it tight. We got a tight time frame. We got to get a lot more stuff in. If there's room at the end, then we'll come back for additional questions. Representative Rawlings is first up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't sense a lot of information on performance metrics after graduation. Like, do you do quantitative and qualitative analysis of postgraduate? The thing I'm thinking is jobs, people having successful careers. Are they more successful as an engineer or in IT or in nursing because they were required to take a diversity course at UK? What are the metrics before these DEI programs were put into effect, and what are they now? What is the comparison? What is the success of students? Do they have better careers because now they know all about diversity, equity, and inclusion? The taxpayers, we owe a duty to the taxpayers for good stewardship of the dollars spent, and there's been hundreds of millions of dollars spent for these programs. So what is the comparison now? During the interim, during this session in 2024, we heard actually that minority representation was down significantly. So how do you reconcile that? How do you justify this program?
So to answer your first question about, we do have information in our data collaborative that talks that will show you progress towards career. We have the UI data that we use. We have data, so we can actually track students to see. So we can do that. As far as knowing whether or not the individual students received any DEI training, we wouldn't necessarily know that. We don't have that flagged. It's not required. So we wouldn't have that flagged in our system to know which students had that and which ones didn't. Our minority student participation, overall participation, is obviously going down. One of the really big populations we need to focus on are low-income students. Once we get them in, we're doing a really good job with them then, but getting them at the table into our institutions, we're really not doing as well in that regard as we need to. We've got to do better. But as far as, once they get there, we can be successful with them and on their careers. But again, we don't really have it tagged as to knowing whether someone got DEI training or not. Okay. But we can see the progress they've made once they get into their careers. And I do think that's something that we need to look at to see just in general, as students succeed and proceed and they are able to graduate, how well are they doing in the workforce, and tracking and starting to set goals and metrics about workforce participation and how much money they're earning in their careers, and really taking a hard look at what careers they're going into. I think that's very important, and we'll definitely take a look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Representative Bojanowski.
Yes, could you just briefly expand upon how universities can minimize non-academic barriers to success?
So in our best practices document, there are examples of, in the student success portion of that, of how each individual institution approach that. We took a look at the reports that we talked about earlier and what those institutions were specifically doing. And so some of the campuses, when we talk about some of the non-academic barriers, we look at, for example, student basic needs. And so making sure that students have access to food banks and food pantries, making sure that they have access to, if, for example, they have $100 of due for their rent that they are lacking, that there are emergency funds that they can have access to on those campuses, that if they need those kinds of assistance, that would be examples of those non-academic barriers, because we know that if they are lacking food, if they are housing insecure, those kinds of things, and that would take precedence over getting to class. And so making sure that those kinds of things. So those would be some examples.
Representative Massaroni.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Last summer in 2023, CPE released a report titled Best Practices in Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Keeping that report in mind, which I'm sure you're familiar, does CPE encourage universities to use questions related to diversity while hiring their faculty?
I mean, that's something they certainly can do as part of the policy. It's not mandated in any way. I do think it's important, again, how we define diversity and making sure that we're thinking about that in a broad way and not just based on race, to make sure that when hiring folks, that they're open to different points of view and different perspectives and that sort of thing. Certainly not just based on race, obviously, but that's something that they certainly can do, but it's not a requirement.
But it is something you encourage.
I don't know that I would say
according
encourage.
to your report released last summer.
Well, it was something that we highlighted as an effective practice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Co-Chair Tipton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try and be brief. Travis, excuse me. You mentioned in your presentation that there is a process that a school cannot have a new program if they don't meet their school's equal education opportunity goals. Do we currently have any institutions that are in that situation?
Yeah, so every year we do an evaluation. Kentucky State University is one institution this year, and then Somerset Community and Technical College is the other.
How long of how difficult it is for a school to get out of that situation and back where they can start new programs?
Well, we do engage through a waiver process. We have some parameters that we outline for the institutions in order to help things that they can identify to help them to be more successful. Kentucky State University's already received their waiver. It was approved at the last CPE meeting. And Somerset as well have all been approved already. We did engage with them heavily, but we know that they have some pending academic programs that they needed to get approved. So we spent a lot of time with them to get their waiver process adopted and approved. So they do the things they need to do. It's a pretty easy process, and we've had to work with virtually all the institutions on this. I mean, it's not the same ones every year. We've had some repeat, but generally speaking, it's different ones throughout the years. Usually 2 or 3, 4 maybe, some at the most, I think. But we work with them on the waiver process. And some haven't sought a waiver. If they don't have any new academic programs that they're seeking to offer in the year, well, then they usually don't do it. But most have.
Mr. Chair, I have one more quick question. Please, you'll indulge me. In your presentation, you gave a definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Mm-hmm. Is that definition in statute, regulation, or policy?
It's in a policy. It's essentially in regulation because it's a policy that's incorporated by reference in a regulation. Yeah.
Senator Williams.
Thank you very much. We communicated last session. We had testimony from a professor and a student about issues they had with DEI. It's a little bit related to the previous questions. But we had a professor that stated that a diversity statement was required, but he was instructed he could not ask a question about it, and it appeared to disqualify individuals from that a position based upon the diversity statement itself. And also the student in an RA position had to have a diversity statement, and she was otherwise apparently qualified. But because the diversity statement was deemed to be inadequate, she was not hired. And also for that individual, there was a adherence to a personal conviction that may have lowered a grade or caused her to get out of a class because she would not change her personal convictions, which were probably religiously based. But they were personal convictions nevertheless. And I know we communicated she did not file a complaint. Right. Quite frankly, I don't think she was very well treated by in that committee by you all, or apparently by the committee. I wouldn't have done it either. But is there a way that we can have what we asked? You said you would look into it. You would have an investigation. Can we do an investigation other than through this professor and this student who have already put themselves out there, that you can look into these things? Is there a diversity statement? Could that be used to disqualify you from a position? And is it the case that there are some, perhaps individual teachers, perhaps institutionally, adherence to personal convictions would lower your grade in a class? What mechanism do we have to investigate that you can do an investigation other than having these individual students?
Well, we process student complaints, obviously, and that's where we were, going with the, I hope I didn't treat her poorly at all. I hope you weren't. I mean, I came to and spoke to her and gave her my information, so I tried to be as nice to her as possible. So I hope you weren't talking about us being not kind to her, because I went out of my way to do so. But
it wasn't you.
Okay, good. While we normally process student complaints, I mean, any issues that you'd like for us to take a look at, and I mean, we can find out the information on, if there are some questions you all have, issues that we get in. We can't really look at individual student cases without their permission, obviously, because of student privacy rights. But just in general, if you have questions about things that are happening on our institutions, we get answers to those all the time. So I'm happy to follow back up with you, and we can maybe map out some questions that you have, and maybe we can get some answers to those.
Very good. I think that's would be adequate. Appreciate that.
Okay. Thanks.
Senator Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's good to see you, Dr. Offit. And my question is directed to you. In your discussion, you used the term underrepresented groups. And so I'm curious, what do you mean by that term, underrepresented groups? And maybe you can put that in a historical context for me when you use that term. I'm interested in why you use that term, and you talk about the improvements you've made or we have made as a state in that area. So could you elaborate a little bit more on that? Elaborate a little bit more on that, please, for me.
So when we look at the term underrepresented is a term that is used for those student groups or those student populations that typically have not received the same parity in access to post-secondary education. And so if you're looking at race and ethnicity, then that might be your students of color. In certain contexts, that might be your low-income students. And as we evolve and we start looking at where we're moving forward and broadening that terms, it may include those adult learners. It may also include groups such as your first-generation students. And so historically, again, we're looking at, we say underrepresented minority specifically, but as we look forward, then that and talk about the broad notion of diversity and not using underrepresented or diversity interchangeably with race and ethnicity, then we're looking at those broader terms.
One quick follow-up, please, Mr. Chair. So in the historical context, we're talking about University of Kentucky because that was mentioned here, represented. That we're talking about going back to a period of time where we didn't see, and I'm going to use the term race here, we didn't see many black students at the University of Kentucky. And so after the 1982 decision by the Department of Justice saying that we had, in effect at that time, a dual system higher education, one for blacks and one for whites. And this was, 28 years after Brown. Actions were taken to correct that so that we could provide black students an equal opportunity to go to UK as white students had. And this is what you've been tracking, I guess, or CP has been tracking for the last 40 years.
Yeah, that's correct. We could, as Dr. Offit mentioned, we continue to evolve in this process. We evolved out of the Kentucky plan and desegregation plan and evolved our definition of equal educational opportunity goals. In the first iteration, we've evolved again in 2016. We're in a different environment here in 2024. We will continue to evolve and but I mean, at the end of the day, we would just want to make sure the students that need the help get the supports they need in order to be successful. That's what we're after.
I've got the final question here in this segment. So back to Mr. Powell, one of your initial statements. We started with desegregation and 40, 50 years ago, the CPE post-secondary response. And you kind of seem to make DEI synonymous with that, the universities trying to address segregation. Is that what you were saying, that it's synonymous, or
not necessarily? I mean, we certainly.
I guess let me reframe the question so
Okay.
you can get exactly what I'm asking. So, didn't the idea of DEI, come along a lot later than our initial response to segregation and equality? And those
Correct. Yes, and I would say, in 2016, for many years it was just the diversity policy, right? And then
when did that start, do you think?
I would assume it started somewhere in that window when we were still under the Kentucky plan.
2010 or after?
Well, probably when we were still in it. And then after we got out in 2010, we adopted a new policy.
Okay.
That was just the diversity policy. And then in 2016, we expanded it to diversity, equity, and inclusion, which was kind of new at the time, frankly. It was not a term that was being used, and those words were not being put together all the time. It was still kind of new. And, we took the opportunity to define those terms as we best saw fit. So.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That'll end this segment. If you guys could stick around, if you don't mind. Up next, we have Northern Kentucky University. As is usual with education meetings, we're short on time. And so I initially said 10 minutes. If you could kind of maybe ratchet that down to 7 or 8 minutes and tell us, state your name for the record, and then tell us what Northern Kentucky is doing in the area of DEI.
And let me try it again. I'm Katie Short-Thompson, and I'm the president of Northern Kentucky University. And I'm happy to be here with you this morning. And here we go. I think it's important just to begin by thinking a little bit about the university's founding in 1968. For 56 years, we've really been working to serve our region, to educate the citizens of our region, and to prepare the folks in our region for careers of meaning and impact in the region. If you look at our mission, it's pretty straightforward, and we really work to become the social and economic engine of the region. In interest of time, I'm going to keep moving because I was ready for 20 minutes. Our vision is just that. It is to be the national leaders in educating students, being student ready, being regionally engaged, lending our expertise, and making sure that we are empowering diverse learners for economic and social mobility. As we define the terms of DE&I at Northern Kentucky University, we define them as such. So diversity is variety or differences. It's any difference that makes a difference. Equity refers to this notion of the process of ensuring freedom from bias or favoritism so that all can reach their potential. Keep moving. And inclusion is the process of improving success for all. We're really invested in access to education and then tools to make sure that our students are successful. I would argue that to admit folks, we have to make sure that we support them to be successful. It's not fair to admit folks who can't be successful. So we work really hard to ensure their success. We talk a lot at the university about inclusive excellence, and by that we really just mean making sure that all of our students feel a part of something special, that they belong, and that they can be successful as students and then as graduates. As such, we offer an ever-evolving set of programs and projects and activities that are available for all students from all walks of life with all differences, and they're really aimed to grow each student's abilities as it relates to academic development, social development, and professional development, getting ready for the workforce. When we think about our diverse learners at Northern Kentucky University, we think about them in a very broad way. And I would simply say that we have a broad definition of diversity. It recognizes any number of different differences, ways that we are each unique from one another, many of us having many different attributes. So whether it's age or class or race, family status or gender, sexual orientation or socioeconomic status, physical or cognitive abilities, first-generation college students, of which we have many, military or veteran status, cultural, political, religious affiliation, the list goes on. We have a very diverse student body, folks who come from all walks of life. At the university, you won't be surprised to know that we think a lot about teachable moments, making sure that our students are learning from our faculty and staff as well as from each other. They have an opportunity to really interact cross-culturally, and I would argue that NKU believes that the college campus at its best meets each student where they are and brings them forward to learn and to flourish and to reach their goals. And I would also say that ideally, not only are those students learning from our incredible faculty and staff, but they're learning from each other. And that can be a really powerful way in which to learn. There's a phrase, you probably have heard it in your lives like I have, that birds of a feather often flock together. At the university, we have 223 different affinity groups. There are affinity groups that are like student clubs or organizations, ways that they gather really to build into each other a sense of belonging and support. Of course, students pay fees for those sorts of activities, and oftentimes students are the ones that are driving the actual clubs and organizations that we have at the university. They see a need, and they create a club to meet that need. They have an interest, they create a club or organization to have that. So I would simply say that as it relates to these affinity groups, not different actually from legislative caucuses where certain folks with shared interests spend time together. There is a place for everyone to gather, a place for every student at Northern Kentucky University. Just as a somewhat messy visual illustration of just how many groups we have at the university to support our students, here are 223 of those student groups, and they run the gamut from social groups to religious groups to academic groups to Greek groups, you name it. I mean, the list goes on. There is something for everyone. If you like to run, there's a group for you. If you're into Disney, there's a group for you. So there's quite literally just about every imaginable group students have conceived of to really find their people at the university, and they find belonging and community and support in those groups. I think that there are several different underpinnings of a good college education I just want to cover quickly. Number one, that's diversity of thought. For those of you who don't know me, I actually began my career at Northern Kentucky University. I was a faculty member for 14 years. I actually taught political communication, and what I prided myself on as a faculty member is making sure that every single one of my students knew that they were entitled to learn and to build their own belief systems around their own ideas and to test them with others' ideas. So in other words, it was not about one size or one idea fits all. It was about learning all the different ideas and figuring out which ones are the right ones for them. So giving them critical thinking tools to also question those many different ideas that we pose to them. So I was always proud to say that they could never guess what party from which I personally affiliated, because my job was to make sure that they knew all the different perspectives, all the different candidates. In addition, freedom of speech and expression is alive and well at Northern Kentucky University. We believe strongly in all of the parties on our campus, their freedom to express themselves, their freedom to speak. And so this is a fairly long chunk of our policy, of which we are very committed, in which all of us are free to speak and think and inquire and assemble related to our own ideas. Furthermore, for the faculty in particular, we're committed to the notion of academic freedom, this idea where all of our faculty are free to search for truth, and they are free to express it, and they have lots of responsibilities that come with those freedoms as well. So it's important to think about how the academic freedom guiding our faculty makes sure that they are free to inquire and teach and conduct research in all facets of our university's community. That is a basic freedom of our faculty. As you all know, we are regionally accredited by SACS, and this is their diversity, equity, and inclusion statement. And as you also know, we work hard to be compliant with our regional accreditor. Our regional accreditation allows us to vie for federal funding, and that is incredibly important to us. We have quite a bit of federal funding. Our students, for example, have financial aid thanks to these regulations and our compliance with accreditation. Additionally, for students to transfer from one accredited school to another, that is what's required for those credits to transfer. For a student to earn a second degree at another institution, they have to come from a regionally accredited school. So it's important for us to make sure that we adhere to and comply with SACS credentials and expectations. In addition to SACS, we also have, across many different academic programs, we have 45 different academic program accreditations in particular to those actual academic programs. So there are many of them. I won't share them all with you today, but here are several examples. There are on the screen several different examples of programs that are externally accredited, and in those cases they have those additional requirements that are related to DEI. And so, for example, in particular, if you think about nursing, the CCNE, which is for nursing educators, they have a list of courses, a list of concepts that are required for all nursing students to become acquainted with. So, for example, the concept of social determinants of health. There are different norms in folks in their patients' health profiles that are related to who they are, where they're from. It's important because it's required by those accrediting bodies that we teach those concepts and our students master those along with everything else they're learning at the university. Another example would be in education. Our student teachers will go out and teach students from varying backgrounds, and they're required by their accrediting body to be able to be prepared to teach different populations of students. The list goes on. There are 45 of them, but you get the idea that these are accreditation requirements, not just from SACS. So I would say there are a number of things that we're not doing at the university as it relates to DEI. We don't have institutionally funded scholarships based on DEI attributes. We don't have a bias incident reporting team. We don't have DEI criteria and admission. And we are also, our diversity statements that have been used over the years for hiring or for application or consideration are not a condition of employment, of promotion, or other benefits. But let me tell you a little bit about the good news about what's going on at Northern Kentucky University. There's a lot to say that's great. Our retention rates across difference are higher than they've ever been. If you look at the black line, we actually have the highest level of retention across our entire student body we've ever experienced. That's something to celebrate. Secondly, if you look at the yellow line, that is our URM students, our students of color. And again, we have increased retention significantly for our students of color. And a lot of that has to do with additional supports, additional programming that they feel supported and are able to be successful thanks to those offerings. If you look at the blue line, that's our first generation students who have also been improving over the years. And then our gray line is low income, which have been dramatically improving over the last few years. Then furthermore, graduation rates have also generally been on the upswing. There have been some challenges, thanks in large part to a pandemic that certainly had a significant impact on our students as they traveled that road. So again, we've seen significant increases in graduation rates and retention. I can tell you I was away for 13 years and the numbers are significantly higher just 13 years later. We've done a lot of great work and we're excited to continue it. So when you look at the full host of different programs that we have, the themes around them are really the following. All of our students at the university are expected to meet common learning outcomes and objectives and professional standards. We want to make sure that we're graduating students who are well prepared to succeed. Second of all, we want them to really learn about themselves and about others. We want them to build relationships with people who are both similar to them and different from them. And then we also want them to explore NKU's campus and their programs. We see that NKU can be a place where they can really find support and grow as people and as students. And of course, there are also benefits that many of our workforce partners see as important, like learning to communicate across difference, communicating well with different people. And we have these practices called high impact practices, study abroad. There are practices like undergraduate research. There are a lot of different high impact practices that our students do together, and they really build into our students. And finally, a few other things related to workforce. Our students are certainly working to build their professional skill sets and their knowledge and connecting them well with the regional workforce assets. A few last thoughts. This work does not actually expend a whole lot of money in terms of our greater budget. If you actually look at FY24, this past academic year, we spent 0.34% of our entire budget on programs and activities related to DEI elements. And if you look at, as you just did, the retention and graduation rates, and you can see that we have seen positive results across different student populations. Furthermore, our students are reporting high levels of engagement and satisfaction as it relates to their education and to their experience at the university. It's not just the education, it's also how they feel when they're there. It helps them to stay there. And many of our students, 82% of 84,000 of our alumni have stayed in the region. So when you really look at what our mission is, what our vision is, I can say that our workforce is happy to have us in their midst. And they certainly are seeing the benefits of having folks who actually want to stay in the region and enter right into the workforce. So finally, I would simply share that the folks that I meet with often in boards are oftentimes telling me that our graduates need to be prepared to work in a global economy. They need to know about people who are different from them. They need to be ready to serve clients from all around the world. And NKU is also being asked often, almost on a daily basis, to really grow our enrollment so that we can grow the pipeline into the workforce. As you well know, not enough babies were born in 2008, and we are now working to deal with a pretty significant workforce shortfall. And so my job is to work as hard as I can to attract as many different students into our university, prepare them well, support them well, and help them to align with our workforce demands. And so I will simply say this, we're working hard at it and we're seeing positive results. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. We have 5 questions. If we're going to get through all of those questions, everyone has to be really, really tight, or we'll have to cut them off. We have Senator Williams up first.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask you a question on your DEI and that thought. I don't think they require you to have any DEI and statement or did I hear you say that they require your accreditation agencies?
So I actually didn't say that. I just shared their diversity statement. And as of this year, it actually was not included in their official assurance expectations or criteria. It has been a guiding principle until this year, however. And, certainly the programs that I mentioned, the 45 different programs, those specifics remain across those different programs, those program accreditations.
Statement, do you require a professor or staff to address a student using gender pronouns different from the genetic sex of that student, even if it's not consistent with the staff's personal conviction?
We do not have any policy or particular instruction to our faculty related to pronoun usage.
Do the departments have that on their own?
Not to my knowledge.
Senator Thomas.
Thank you for your presentation, President Short Thompson. And I've been on Northern campus before. As a matter of fact, a few years ago, I was a visiting professor there, taught a class there. So
That's great.
I'm very, very proud of the work you've done with Northern Kentucky University.
Thank you.
If you can, I want to go back to the slide that Senator Williams just mentioned, the NKU has 45 different external academic programs, accreditation. If you can go back to that.
You bet. Let's see.
And while you're doing that, I'll ask my question in the interest of time. The one thing I've noticed, again, and I'm from Lexington, about the University of Kentucky over the last 40 years, is that as it's increased its diversity, both racially, both from a cultural competence standpoint, in all the affinity groups, it's actually become a stronger university. I brought this point up last week at a government contracts review committee when we were talking about UK's brand. That UK now is among the top 100 colleges and universities in this country because of the work that's benefited by its move toward being a more diverse university. It's the same true for Northern. Have you seen your academic standing increase as you've become a more culturally diverse university?
So it depends on how you're measuring it. And so certainly if you look at our rankings and our ratings over the years, they've improved. And so have our all of our different diversity metrics. So are they both happening at the same time? It would appear to be so. We have a number of highly ranked programs across NKU's campus. And, as I've indicated, just the success metrics alone have improved over the years, as has the proportion of our students who are diverse. So, we are a reflection of the community in which we live. The community in which we live has become more diverse as well. And so, again, we're serving the students who are in our midst. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. Thank you.
Representative Decker.
I think my question was asked and answered. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Callaway.
Thank you, Chairman. And I will try and keep it short, even though I've got so many questions. The first one that hopped out on looking at your budget page here for African American Student Initiative, Latino Student Initiative, LGBTQA plus student initiatives. As a mother of a 17-year-old who's now looking at colleges, you mentioned you want to make sure everybody feels welcome there. Everybody learns about their culture. And I see, Black graduate celebrations. I see Black student welcomes. I see Black achiever. I see, there's African American alumni that come and participate, which is great. I see I see Black student unions. I don't see white anything. No mention. I see Black male-female events. My son, what would he relate to on your campus? And how is this inclusive? And how is it promoting unity while you segregate black, white? Well, we're assuming there's some whites that go there. We don't know because there's no mention of any activities for whites. So I'm having a problem understanding what the justification is when we use the terms diversity to exclude very specifically my son.
So 85% of NKU students are white. And if you look at the list of different groups, for example, many different students attend and belong to different student groups that are offered here. There's certainly all students are welcome and included to attend any of the different groups. And so I think that if you travel the student union at the university, you'd see a lot of different students either hanging out with folks who are in these particular affinity groups or other groups. As I said before, I mean, there's a place for everyone at Northern Kentucky University. And, as I said, some birds flock together, others don't. Many are multicultural groups where they're learning from each other. And I can say that there are the specific groups that we've talked about and you read about in the DEI materials you read about those because they were asked about, and that's what was presented and provided. If you asked about the full array of programs that are offered at the university, you would certainly have a much longer report to read. And so I think that if you looked at a daily operation of the student union or of any academic building on campus, you would see the People's University. You would see everyone, a place where everyone belongs, where everyone has a place, where everyone has a voice, where everyone has an ability to interact with other people. And so it's like this organization, for example, if you think about legislative caucus having a black caucus or a women's caucus or a sportsman caucus, not everyone, I imagine, attends all of those things, but some of you might find value in them. And so universities aren't one size fits all. I mean, the academic qualities and classes have some elements of that, standards and objectives. But when it comes to that social and support wraparound services that we offer to make sure that people see themselves there, that they feel comfortable there, that they want to stay there and graduate, that's why these different programs are offered, and that's what the different students benefit from. And I can tell you, I'm a mother of 3 college students myself, and they each, to their own personalities, have enrolled and joined all sorts of different things, none of which I could have predicted in terms of the kinds of things they're engaged and involved in and interested in. But that's an education where you have the opportunity to learn about other people and other groups, and you have the opportunity to study abroad, and you have this great chance to meet people who come from other parts of the state or other parts of the country or around the world. Not to mention just like the same sports you like or like the same kinds of activities you like. So there is something for everyone, frankly. And if you look proportionately at what's offered, particularly around DEI and the rest of the student activities, you would find that actually there are far more dollars spent on student affairs and other activities for the entire student body. I appreciate your question.
Senator Neal will be the last question in this segment.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so very much. In the interest of time, I'm not going to ask a question. I do want to make a quick comment. I really appreciate your report. It reflected a commitment to student success.
Thank you.
All student success, which I think all of us are interested in. Well done. Thank you very much for your program. I look forward to digging into it further to know more.
Thank you, Senator. It's why I get up every single day.
Thank you so much for Northern Kentucky University being present and that good presentation.
Thank you.
Up next, we have Morehead State University. If you will come forward. Dr. Morgan, you're not new to this position. Turn the green light on, state your name, and please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Mr.
Once you're
Chairman.
settled.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee, co-chairs and committee. My name is Jay Morgan. I serve as president at Morehead State University. Let me get queued up here. Mr. Chair and committee, thank you for the opportunity to present today on your data request. Hopefully I can make up some time for you today because I've got 2 or 3 slides that I think will summarize some of the data requests that you had. First, let me say that Morehead State University values the diversity of our students, the diversity of our workforce. our overall people. We respect all people, and we want our students and our faculty and visitors to feel like they have a sense of belonging on our campus. And we want to make sure our graduates are culturally competent when they graduate to enter the workforce. With that said, and many of you know that our institution is predominantly a low-income serving institution, and that leans us very heavily to put the majority of our resources that are available toward low-income initiatives and projects for our student success. So a lot of our time and efforts are spent more in the low-income areas. However, let me run through your data request, and co-chairs, I think I can summarize some of the data that we provided you in just a couple of slides. The first item, and we broke this down to address some of the questions you had around employees and hiring processes. Morehead State University does not require applicants to our institution or applicants for promotion at our institution, either full or part-time, to divulge any diversity, political or other statements in order to move forward. However, we do contract with some federal agencies, and as a part of doing that, we do have to meet certain compliance measures, particularly around federally protected groups, veterans, disability services, and et cetera. And that's why you saw in our packet that we submitted that we also included veterans and disability services. MSU does not have an employee-based DEI office. We do have a chief diversity officer, and that individual does the portion of that job as 5% of their overall time. And mainly that is to make sure that we're dealing with the compliance, regulation, and dialogue with the Office of Civil Rights, the Kentucky Human Rights Commission, U.S. Department of Education, Kentucky Department of Education, and the Kentucky Council on Postsecondary Education. And we do not require DEI training for our employees. Moving quickly and summarily to our students, just as a quick slide, we do not use race as a basis for any type of admission to our institution, and do not plan on doing so. We do have a number of state-supported scholarships. These are dollars that are carved out of tuition monies that the overall student body pays. You can see them listed there. I will not go word for word, but I did list the ones that also go into some of those federally protected groups with veterans, international, and I mentioned before we do have a lot of emphasis toward an Eagle Assurance or Eagle Assist program. That's a last dollar scholarship program for low-income students regardless of race or ethnicity. We do not require DEI training for students, although, as you might imagine, with probably over 2,000 courses on our campus, DEI or diversity is probably discussed in some of the courses. However, it is not the main theme. So we do have 4 offices that comprise really what our submission is for your data request. They're shown there. Each one of them has 1 employee to staff that. Eagle Diversity Education Center, which is a student-based support center for anyone who wants to go to it. Military Veterans Resource Center, Disability Services Center, and an International Student Center. So those meet kind of our criteria, Mr. Co-Chairs, for federally protected groups and special populations on our campus. We do support freedom of speech, innovation, and certainly the free exchange of ideas, and not only that, but also academic freedom for speech on our campus. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll pause there and see if there are any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan. Thank you for keeping it short as we're coming up against the clock. We have 1 question from Senator Tishner.
Thank you so much. You mentioned low-income student is your main focus as far as making sure you have are serving the students that are coming your way. When I was looking through the CPE's diversity, equity, inclusion policies, you all didn't score very well on that. But then again, you are serving low-income students, which they say that is a part of their diversity program as well. Have you been affected or do you fear that you may be affected by the CPE's ability to not approve you for academic programs that you would like to bring onto your campus based on their scoring mechanism?
For the state diversity plan
Yes.
and the goals. Senator, to my knowledge and recollection, I think over the past 7 years that I've been president at Morehead State, there was one of the 7, I believe, that we did not meet the goals of the state CPE diversity plan. I believe that is correct. I think subsequently we made up that ground and were able to get over that short-term hump and move forward. Sometimes it can be difficult to meet not only the goals of a diversity plan, but also really support the region that we serve. 1 out of every 2 students at our institution, 54%, almost 55%, are categorized federally as low-income students. So 1 out of 2 students. You can see the enormous amount of funds, energy, and emphasis that we have to, by mission, move to support our low-income students. We have to do that in order to maintain retention, graduation rates, and effective programs and meet accreditation requirements. With that being said, we do not let diversity take a back seat with respect to the CPE state plan. However, there have been some times when we've gently disagreed maybe with some of the metrics that were in there, not necessarily the overall plan, but maybe how some of them were calculated. We just simply couldn't meet them. It was just a product of the type of institution we were and are and will probably serve in the future, and that continues to be 1 out of every 2 students being a low-income student. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you so much. That'll end this particular segment. Up next, thank you, Dr. Morgan.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Just as an announcement, I'll go ahead and announce it and then we'll move forward. But we have the Van Sittert Center for Constitutional Advocacy at the Goldwater Institute. Whenever you're seated, ready, and everything, you can hit the green light and then please state your name for the record and proceed. As an announcement to the committee, this group was allowed to speak, not because they were in the grouping, but because, as with any entity, you can sign up at the back and speak in opposition or for any subject matter that comes before the committee, and it's on that basis they were added to this list. So whenever you're ready, state your name for the record and please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman West. Thank you, Chairman Tipton. My name is Tim Minella. I am a senior fellow at the Goldwater Institute, an organization that advocates for liberty and constitutional principles in all 50 states. And I'm very happy to be here today to speak on this important issue. I also was a faculty member for 5 years at the University of Kentucky in the Lewis Honors College, and I care deeply about ensuring access and opportunity for all of Kentucky's students, and that is why I'm excited to speak on this issue today, to speak on what I believe is a barrier to those goals in Kentucky, which is CPE's diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. The first point I want to make is that statute gives CPE the authority to ensure that institutions across the Commonwealth are engaging in promoting equal educational opportunity. CPE has taken this mandate and they have substituted equal educational opportunity. They have substituted that out for diversity, equity, inclusion, and racial discrimination. That's the first point I want to make, is that statute gives them the authority to make sure that institutions are pursuing equal educational opportunity, with the proviso that if they don't meet that, they are not eligible for CPE to approve their new academic programs. The regulations that CPE has written, that statute does empower them to do, that is how they bring in the diversity, equity, and inclusion goals, and what Mr. Powell called targets, I do on the following slide here call quotas. CPE is requiring each public institution in the Commonwealth of Kentucky to set targets as Mr. Powell and Dr. Offutt put it, for these categories. Let me also note, this is one of those, so 3 of these are refer to the percentage of student body who classifies as underrepresented minority or URM, the percentage of full-time or tenure-track faculty who are classified as URM, and the percentage of employees in managerial or administrative positions classified as URM. This is how CPE defines URM based on their current policies. Let me repeat, each institution must set targets annually for these measures. Let's be clear about what's happening. Every institution must set targets for the racial and ethnic composition of students, faculty, and staff annually. This doesn't advance equal opportunity. It mandates unequal treatment based on race and ethnicity. Such a practice is antithetical to the principle enshrined in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution that no person should be treated differently on account of race. The Supreme Court's recent decision in Students for Fair Admissions recognized this principle in striking down race-conscious admissions policies at colleges and universities. And earlier this year, Kentucky Attorney General Russell Coleman issued an opinion finding that CPE's defining of underrepresented minority in race-exclusive terms violated the Constitution. Let me also note, as Mr. Powell and Dr. Offutt discussed, CPE promotes diversity, equity, and inclusion policies that go beyond those racial and ethnic targets that I just discussed. In their 2023 report on best practices in diversity, equity, and inclusion, they hold up for emulation by all Kentucky institutions certain practices at certain campuses. One of these that they speak glowingly about is a course called UK 101. This is an academic orientation course that is required for many students at UK to take. According to CPE's report, this course includes, quote, unconscious bias content, which introduce concepts and terms like microaggressions, ally, accomplice, and co-conspirator, unquote. This CPE is encouraging institutions to establish courses like this that force students to spend time and tuition dollars on academically unserious material like these DEI concepts that add little or nothing to their education. And again, institutions are basically required to adopt these policies because of CPE's review process, annual review process that I'll get into shortly. Dr. Offutt and Mr. Powell said they don't require diversity and inclusion questions during hiring, but that's another best practice that they mentioned in this report that they are certainly advocating that via this report that institutions adopt. Like I said, they have an annual review process where each institution is scored based on how the institution is, in CPE's judgment, is fulfilling its diversity plan, its institutional diversity plan. Through this annual process, CPE essentially threatens public institutions. Get on board with racial discrimination and DEI practices or lose the ability to expand your academic offerings to serve students. As they indicated, institutions that don't pass this process cannot start new academic programs, as Dr. Morgan discussed near the end of his presentation. And this isn't just a hypothetical threat. In the 2024 review of diversity plans, CPE found that Kentucky State University, the Commonwealth's only public historically black institution, had failed to achieve the requisite number of points based on its rubric. This was the only four-year institution during this review process in the Commonwealth that failed to remain eligible. In response, Kentucky State Institution applied for a waiver. As part of this application process, they submitted a performance improvement plan. This performance improvement plan committed to increasing its It's recruitment and enrollment of Latinx students. Now, there's nothing wrong with recruiting Latino students or any other kind of student, but it's difficult to see how KSU's upping their numbers and increasing their numbers of Latino students by itself is going to improve outcomes for all students. And in seeking a waiver from CPEs, KSU chose to use the academically trendy term Latinx, a label that Latinos almost universally reject. KSU is already operating under a management improvement plan, which this committee heard testimony on in its June 4th meeting. This school, which is facing a significant number of challenges, can ill afford to focus on faddish academic theories to please the DEI regime at CPE. And again, let me emphasize that CPE requires this because their rubric both looks at whether an institution is meeting the targets they've set and whether they're faithfully implementing the diversity strategies such as those that are endorsed in CPE's best practices report. In conclusion, CPE has abused its statutory powers and overstepped its mandate to ensure equal educational opportunity at Kentucky public institutions. In place of this worthy goal, CPE has substituted racial discrimination and dubious DEI policies that accomplish little or nothing for Kentucky students from all backgrounds. The Goldwater Institute is recommending that the legislature consider two crucial steps to address this. First, consider Goldwater's model policy on abolishing DEI bureaucracies, which prohibits any attempt to promote differential treatment on account of race in public institutions. Second, consider the Freedom from Indoctrination Act, a Goldwater policy that addresses DEI courses like the UK 101 course. Courses like this one promote DEI doctrines to a captive audience of students, many of whom must take them in order to graduate. The model policy prohibits requiring students to take these DEI courses as a condition of graduation or advancement. In conclusion, CPE is charged with promoting equal educational opportunity for all students, but its reinterpretation of its statutory mandate leaves it standing directly in the way of this goal. It is imperative that the legislature reins in this body and prohibits discrimination in every part of the Commonwealth's system of higher education. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. We have, once again, we're up against the clock on time. We have 3 questions. We're going to limit it to that if each one could be brief. First up, we have Senator Neal.
I defer to my colleague.
Senator Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Manella, believe it or not, I got your report last night, and I got up early this morning, 6 o'clock, to make sure I read your report. And your report is quite critical, University of Kentucky. Point of information here. You should know that I come from 3 generations of UK graduates, starting with my grandmother in the 50s. Okay? And for a person like me, that's probably as much as you can take, given that UK didn't begin enrolling blacks until 1950. I remember my grandmother telling me when she was a student at UK in 1955 that there were maybe 3 or 4 that looked like her at UK. Okay. Beginning in 1982, when the Department of Justice indicated that UK was operating, and not just UK, but all of the universities in Kentucky were operating a segregated system of higher education. You know, Kentucky State educating blacks, all the other schools educating whites, that changes were made. As we've heard here today throughout the testimony after testimony, that since that change and UK offering equal opportunity to all of its students, it's now transformed itself now to be one of the best universities in this country. That's not me saying that. That's what U.S. World Report says. It's gone from being a segregated institution now to one of the top 100 universities in this country because of this intentional decision making to be a school that welcomes and provides opportunity for all. Now, you say in your report today that one of the changes you would make, and I'm reading here, first, the legislature should revisit CPA's oversight over equal educational opportunity, you had that in quotes, Dr. Manella, ensuring CPA adhere exclusively to promoting policies that are not intended to manipulate the racial makeup of students or staff. So I have a question for you. My question is, what is your intent by that? Or do you intend to want to return UK to the 1950s and what it looked like back then? Or maybe you have, I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt, maybe you have something else in mind that you haven't shared in this report. So please answer that question for me.
The intent is to prohibit racial discrimination in public institutions of higher education, both in admissions and hiring. And let me say, University of Kentucky does excellent things, and I was part of that for a little bit. The intent is not to return the school to the 1950s, as you say. It is to prohibit racial and ethnic discrimination in hiring at admissions. That is the position of the Constitution. That is the position of the Supreme Court. That is a noble goal that is in keeping with equal opportunity. It does not run against that goal of equal opportunity.
We're going to keep this moving along. Senator Neal? Okay. That's okay. Representative Tishner? I'm sorry, Senator Tishner, sorry.
I got demoted there for a second.
Oh my God.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here. I just want to, I want you to clarify something for me, if you don't mind. You mentioned that KSU did not, and CPE touched on this as well, that they didn't meet their standards, and I appreciate Senator Thomas giving us that timeline. So if I'm hearing you correctly, CPE and this diversity program, the efforts were there based off of the civil rights violations of segregation, clearly. And so over the timeline, we are trying to make sure our campuses are welcoming of Black students. That was the initial goal of the diversity programs. And now this program has gotten so far to the point where the only historically Black university in Kentucky did not meet their criteria. Is that correct?
So during the 2024 review process, Kentucky State University, the only public HBCU in the Commonwealth, yes, they were the only four-year institution to be declared ineligible during this process in 2024. Yes. Yep.
And so they needed to bring in more Latino students in order to make that criteria. Were there other ethnic groups that needed to be, or any other underrepresented groups that needed to be upped, low-income students, or just specifically Latino in that criteria?
So I will tell you that Kentucky State is over 2/3 Black in its student body. It is, I believe, 70% URM, according to CPE's definition. So the one, I do not recall how much KSU's performance improvement plan discussed low-income students. I don't recall exactly how many times they discussed that, but based on these targets that CPE sets, where else was KSU going to go? Because they have a very large percentage of African-American students. They have a very large percentage of URM. If I recall the statistics correctly, they are actually lower. They are below their targets on Hispanic students, if I'm correct on that. And so that might be a reason why KSU went in that direction in their performance improvement plan.
Just really quick, is there, I mean, with the policies they have in place, are they at risk of not being a historically Black college if they keep pushing wanting more diversity on this campus? Could they remove that standing for KSU?
I don't know the answer to that. I just find it troubling that that in a diversity review process, the only public HBCU is the one that got dinged in this latest round of review. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, we have two more questions. We're going to wrap it up. Representative Nemus, this may be his first time stepping into an education committee meeting. I don't know, but
I've been here before. I do have a question.
If you could, please make it short.
I got a question of Dr. Powell as he's coming up. Come on up if you would. As he's coming up, I want to say I think we do ourselves a disservice as conservatives in conflating an effort to go after and help people who've been harmed historically, whether they live in neighborhoods of historical redlining or whether they're in poverty or whatever those things are. And we conflate that when in our DEI discussion with, I think, what we should be hyper-focused on, which is making sure we have intellectual diversity and making sure that we attack the places in our university that are going after the institutions of Western civilization and trying to change our culture like we've seen all over the country this past year. But trying to help our African-American kids or our Hispanic kids or poor white kids or whatever who've maybe first time in college, I think that is a laudable goal. And I think as conservatives, we harm our efforts when we conflate those two things that are mighty, mighty different. Here's my question to the doctor. I went and I looked at the University of Louisville Law School, UK Law School, U of L Education School, and UK Education School. We heard that diversity of thought is very important, and there's nothing more true said today, I think. However, when you look at the party representation and the donations of those groups, there's one Republican in the U of L Law School. I think there's one at UK. I don't think there's any education departments at UK or at U of L. I want to know if that's acceptable. If it's not, should something be done about it? And if so, what?
Sort of not familiar with those specific examples, but I will say, as I spoke about revising our policy moving forward, and something that we have talked a lot about is intellectual diversity and ensuring that is part of our policy moving forward, and making sure that that institutions have strategies in place in order to ensure that that's the case. We're never going to learn that's just not part of the educational endeavor if we don't learn from people that are different than us. And if we all think alike, then, our knowledge and thoughts on certain things are not going to be expanded. So we have to make that part of our initiatives. I think that is well within the frame of, equal educational opportunity goals is up for the council to determine. There's no criteria in the statute that defines what that is. So it's up to us to define what it means best. And as we move forward, I think that is absolutely something that we have to include. It is paramount that we are not excluding folks based on the way that they think about things, because that's not the way that we teach students.
Well, I'd like to have a follow-up meeting with you. I'll be quick, Mr. Chairman, because the people who are educating our future teachers are all monolithic in their thought and their political contributions and in their political registration, and all the people who are educating our future lawyers. Those are two areas. I know intellectual diversity is important everywhere, even in engineering. But in those two areas especially, intellectual diversity is crucial. We do not have it. I have not heard anybody say anything about it. Glad to hear you say something about it today, and I'd like to see some movement on those issues.
And I'll just say that, I think cultural competency can help with that actually, but we've got to take it further and ensure that we've got that diversity in place.
So Senator Neal is going to be the final question here, but before he chimes in, just as a reminder to everybody, we're going to be right back here in September talking about DEI, and so we can circle back, save your questions. We can circle back and talk about those more in September. Senator Neal will finish us out, and then I have a couple quick announcements, and we'll adjourn. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to take what you just said and truncate my approach again in the interest of time. I will say, though, that there were so many gaps and so many misrepresentations in the last presentation that it would take me half a day to go through this in any intelligent way to make any sense of what I just heard. That being said, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all the presenters today. Excellent discussion. I'd like to make the announcement at this time. Today, from 1:30 to 4 o'clock, there will be a reception for Dr. Robbie Fletcher at the Foundry downtown. All those on the committee here are invited to attend that, 1:30 to 4 o'clock at the Foundry. Quick note, we also have a couple of proposed regulations on the docket here today. I would draw your attention to those. Do you have any other business to come before this committee? Seeing none, this committee's adjourned.